Absolute lies and total BS about this digital ID, which nobody asked for, nobody needs, and as far as I can tell, nobody wants. But the government seems to insist that they're going to press ahead with this, and now they insist that it was part of their manifesto. Well, we're going to see about that, so please do subscribe if you like this teardown of what they tell you, because I don't believe a word of it. Now, let's go first of all to the petition, because 2.7 million people, which out of the adult population, that's about 5% who bothered to sign this petition to say, we don't want this, we didn't ask for it, we don't need it, and we don't want it. It says, do not introduce digital ID cards. Now, there is a response from government on the right-hand side, which I'm going to come back to, against the manifesto, which is on the left-hand side, which I'm going to come back to. But first of all, let's take a look at my own polls here, because I think these polls probably broke some records. So if I expand this out and zoom in a little bit, you can see those figures there. 77,000 people voted on my poll here, said, what do you think of UK digital ID? Open question, yes, good idea, or no, absolutely not. 97% said no, absolutely not. And then I went further because I thought that's interesting. A lot of people voted and it was 97% were against. Let's have another look at what people really think and whether they'll comply. I said, let's get this straight, because there was some kind of debate about this over on X. Would people actually comply with it? Because apparently it's not going to be a mandatory requirement. It's not going to be something that police can ask for and insist on seeing. It's not something that they can ask for during a stop and search and things like that. Just that you won't be able to work unless you have one. More about that in a minute, because I think that's an overreach, and I'll explain legally why I think so in just a moment, and why I think it's actually not going to go anywhere, but let's get to that later. This poll here, 112,000 people voted when I asked the question, let's get this straight, Starmer implements mandatory digital ID. Do you comply? Coincidentally, 97% of 112,000 people that voted on this poll said no, they won't comply. Now, this then obviously gets very much more difficult if we say, well, actually, if you want to get paid, you're going to have to comply. Do you still comply? Does your employer comply? Do they capitulate and enroll in this stupid scheme that no one really needs? And we really don't need it, because let's take this for a moment. If you are a British citizen and all that sort of stuff, then obviously you don't need one to be able to work currently. If you are a migrant to the country and you're on a visa of some sort, no disrespect intended, but if you're here and you require the proof that you're entitled to work in the UK on the visa status or whatever status you're currently in the UK on, there's a way of doing that. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But absolutely, people do not seem to want this thing. But as I said, despite the petition, there is a response from government. Now, the response is laughable, risible, we would say in the legal world, as something that is so ridiculous it literally makes you laugh. But like I said, the petition has 2.7 million votes to say, no, we don't want this, don't introduce this. So despite that, here is the response from government. And it opens as follows. We will introduce digital ID. Well, I thought this was supposed to be a petition for a debate, not just come back with a bold, screw you, we're doing it anyway response, which is exactly what they've done here. But it gets worse than that. It's not just blind to what people want and what they say. It goes further. It tries to tell you that this was in the manifesto. And believe me, I've painstakingly looked through the manifesto and it's not in there. I mean, they say that it's to modernize government. Well, there's a few things in there about that, but not for digital ID. We'll come back to that in just a moment. They say, we will introduce digital ID within this parliament to help tackle illegal migration. That's, again, it's just the most absurd thing I've ever heard. So they want to implement at the cost of however many millions or tens of millions of pounds, or even hundreds of millions. I've no idea what this is supposed to cost to get every single adult in the UK a digital ID to ensure that we can tackle illegal migration. Now, there's two ways illegal migration comes about. Either people come in and somehow slip in under the net on a plane or an official boat through a port, and they don't have the requisite documentation and they are not picked up by customs, which is probably unlikely for the vast majority of them. Or what is more likely is that they come in on a certain visa, then overstay and disappear, which is more likely. And then, to be fair, the relatively few numbers in respect of illegal migration coming in on boats, which is brazenly waltzing in on a boat or getting picked up by RNLI or the Coast Guard, and then they are brought in as an arriving passenger. Bring my hands on screen here. As an arriving passenger. And not an illegal migrant. So they are treated, I think, in the same way as an illegal migrant. They are documented and everything else. And I think they're given an ID there and then. They do what they can to ascertain who they are and where they came from, which is probably unlikely. But either way, they are dealt with, and I suppose they should be processed. There is a whole process. There's a whole document on it. I looked at it, did a video on it some time ago. When they come in as an illegal migrant, they are trying to tell you that this scheme for tens or hundreds of millions of pounds and whatever it costs in the end is going to somehow prevent illegal migration. That's probably the most absurd thing I've ever heard. And you know what? With all the talk of the dangers of digital ID and your data being out there, that is precisely why I support companies on my channel as partners such as Incogni, who specializes in removing your data from the internet. They help you to disappear. They help to keep you anonymous. If they can't find you, they can't harm you. Incogni is a service that will remove your data from the internet from companies and marketers that store it and share it and sell it. And if you have specific companies that insist on marketing to you, or they just refuse to remove your information, you can tell them specifically, you can tell Incogni specifically to remove your data from those companies. It is a targeted process to help you disappear from the internet. And of course, as they're a partner to my channel, you get a great discount off the service, which I strongly urge you to take up, which is 60% off the annual plan using the code BlackBelt at the link in the description below. You'll get access to a dashboard and you'll see how many companies they are removing your data on an ongoing basis. So check out Incogni with the code BlackBelt to help yourself disappear from the internet. But that's not the only thing they say. They also say making accessing government services easier. Well, I somewhat doubt that it's going to make the services and the way they run easier. I think probably all it's going to do is give you a login to the same services, which you've got already, because you can't get in, for example, to pay your tax, or you can't get into the NHS without having some kind of access already. And so that's not going to change. Those services are already there. You already log in one way or another, and that's not really going to change anything. Now, just today, we've had a situation where HMRC was given an overpayment. And actually, there's a couple of HMRC stories to tell you, and just to tell you why this is not going to change any of that. There are real people with probably so much work to do that they get bogged down in it and they don't end up doing it properly. So no disrespect, but it just doesn't work very well. A couple of situations. One where a payment was mistakenly sent to HMRC, and then they spent hours on the phone trying to tell them that this was a mistaken payment. Can you just apply it against the next tax bill when it's due? They said, well, we will apply it to your account within, I think it was so many tens of days, like 30 or 40 days or something. But you have to call us back to allocate it to the right place. And they said, well, can't you just do that? They said, no, you have to call us back. And they said, well, what if, we just assume that we're paying the correct amount of tax less the incorrect payment, and we get a fine? They said, well, that's why you've got to call back. So they've got to call back is one story. Again, that is not going to be made easier by that person having a digital ID. Another situation, not an overpayment this time. This was where someone had made the normal payment, but they'd allocated it against the current year instead of the year that they were supposed to be paying. But the current year is not due yet. So they allocated it to the wrong year. And then they said, well, what if we get a fine for the previous year? And they said, well, you've got two choices. You can either call us back in so many days again, or you can make another payment. So this just doesn't work. And this single ID is not going to make that any better. But nonetheless, they say that that's going to make government services easier. But there's two examples, and I'm sure there are thousands more of why that is just not going to be the case. They say they're going to consult on it and details will follow soon. And we're not even past the 2-line first paragraph yet in how ridiculous this is. Then they go on to say, the government's announced plans to introduce digital ID fit for the needs of modern Britain. Like I said, we don't need it for all the reasons I've just explained and many more. We do not need it. It's going to make things more difficult, not easier. Modern Britain, what if we get, we do have a bit of an aging population. We have a lot of people who don't have and don't want a smartphone, and any phone that they do have is probably not going to work with this app. They say further down in one of the documents somewhere, they're going to make people available to help guide them through this setup process. But that's not going to get beyond the technology if the technology doesn't work with what they've got. Absolute madness. They say they're committed to making people's lives easier and more secure. But I would suggest as a practitioner whose practice encompasses data protection, data security, and all of this sort of stuff, this is a recipe for disaster because any system can be hacked. No system is completely infallible. So to have all of this in one place is asking for trouble. Putting more control in their hands and obviously in the hands of would-be hackers who guarantee will try to hack this system. And then driving growth, etc., etc., all of this sort of stuff. But the bit that I'm going to pick up on here, aside from all this garbage, which I'm not going to read to you, but I'll read one or two bits to you in a minute, but they say, in line with the manifesto commitment to modernize government, which is absolute lies in my personal opinion, because I've looked at the manifesto and that is not how it reads. But just before I leave this email here, let's take a look down here where they say that too many people are excluded, like 1 in 10 adults don't have a physical photo ID, so struggle to prove who they are. To tackle these interlinked issues, we'll introduce the new national ID. Well, that is just forcing them to do what they're already having difficulty doing in the first place. And then further down, it says, for clarity, it would not be a criminal offence not to hold one. Police would not be able to demand to see it. But they try to say here, employers will have to check the new digital ID when conducting the right to work check. So what if they don't have one? Do they suddenly not get paid? How many millions of people are not going to get paid because they don't have this ID? Or is it going to get to a point, a crunch point, where they just say, no, we're not doing this, we're not having it, and therefore the system collapses? Or worse still, they absolutely enforce it and they cannot pay these workers without this digital ID, and therefore millions of people just don't get paid. That is a very real scenario that I can see playing out here. But let's come back to this bit about the manifesto, because I don't accept this. Because if I expand out a minute to the full double page here, on the left is the manifesto, on the right is this government document, email. Now, let's have a look at this. So I was looking through and I've highlighted bits where I can see anything to do with anything digital. There's no mention of digital ID, by the way, or even electronic ID, nothing of the sort, or anything to do with modern or modernization. So there are certain references to modernization, but it's just very, very general. So have they just weaved this in under your nose, like the employer national insurance and all these kind of things? It says, we will also update national planning policy to ensure the planning system meets the needs of a modern economy, making it easy to build laboratories, digital infrastructure. Nothing about digital ID. Then furthermore, modern transport network, and then a modern economy, talking about modern threats, digital forensics, and then essential digital speaking creative skills. This is talking about children and education. They say we'll modernize and simplify and reform the intrusive and outdated gender recognition law to a new process. We'll remove indignities for trans people who deserve recognition and acceptance. Well, obviously that's fallen flat now with the Supreme Court ruling that men and women in the Equality Act refers to biology. So that obviously fell flat. Labour will digitise the Red Book record of children's health. This got a lot of people up in arms because then that is putting children's data, which is obviously going to be highly sensitive, in a digital system which might be subject to hacking and so on. And then they talk about GPs, modern appointment booking systems. Most GP have a booking system now. I've got it on my app for the local surgery. We can just do that on the app now. We don't need this. We don't need anything different. And this is, again, not to talk about the cost of whatever this is going to cost. Labour will modernise legislation to give patients a greater choice. All of this is talking about modernisation, digital this and digital that, negotiate standalone sector deals such as digital mutual recognition agreements to promote our service exports. This is talking about coalition of countries on the cutting edge of climate action. So all of which, nothing really to do with digital ID. There is no specific talk or mention of digital ID in this Labour manifesto. And this is what they keep calling it, their mandate for change, which was their whole manifesto point here. But none of it talks specifically about a digital ID. So back to the sales pitch and how they tell you this is going to work on the website here. Again, they tell you that it is required for right to work checks to stop those with no right to be in the country from finding work. This is to send a clear message that if you come here illegally, you'll not be able to work, deterring people from making dangerous journeys. Well, let's just look at this, shall we? Because there is already the requirement to prove the right to work to an employer. You get a code. You go through a process of getting this code, proving who you are. You get a photograph there. You share this code with the employer by going through whether it's an e-visa or whatever else it is. So who can get a share code? You use this service if you have a biometric residence permit, and you can use it for 18 months after the expiry date, a biometric residence card, a UK visas and immigration account, and you'll have one of these if you've applied under the EU settlement scheme, or you've used the UK immigration ID check to prove who you are, or you've created one when applying for your visa, or you've created one to get an e-visa, and you get this code, you go through this process, and then you share this code with your employer. That proves that you have the right to work in the UK. Now, obviously, this is to stop people from working illegally. Well, it won't, because either they will do it for cash in hand, or they'll use someone else's ID, or they'll somehow fudge the system as they do already, and it will drive the whole thing underground. It is not going to completely eradicate it unless every single individual in the UK has one of these, and that there is absolutely no possible way of paying these people without going through this system, which is never, ever going to happen, because there will always be ways for them to get around this. And this is not me encouraging crime. This is not me saying that's what you should do. Absolutely not. Obviously, illegal working harms the economy, harms the taxpayer, it harms the government, it harms everything we stand for as a society to function properly, but they will find a way around it. It's just like if you take down one of the gang members running these smuggling operations, someone else will pop up in their place. And that's the whole criticism, because it will be that game of whack-a-mole. Someone else will pop up in their place until they remove the incentives, which include the hotels and the benefits and, basic food. Okay, it might not be great, but it's still a hotel, money and food, however you look at it. And if they get through the refugee status, then they are supported for life. And if they're here long enough, then they get citizenship here. That is the pull factor, not just whether they can work here. Working here is obviously one of the pull factors, and they are obviously working illegally. But this is not going to eradicate that. And I think, moreover, it is far too onerous on the rest of the population to force them to submit to this for reasons which will be beyond your comprehension of government overreach. And that will include every time you buy something, it will ping on a government database. Every bit of money that comes in, every bit of money that goes out, when you visit somewhere, when you travel somewhere, whether you're on public transport, what services you buy, what loans you buy, they say that it will be easier for this and this and this. But what they're not telling you is we will monitor when you're doing this, this and this. We've already had hints that say they will just take the money off you if you owe more than £1,000 in tax and you have the money in the account and certain other criteria apply. They will just take the money from you. But what if that is an error? Take the examples that I've given you where someone paid money and they allocated it to the wrong year. Therefore, the year that was outstanding, they will say is outstanding, thus owing tax. And then they could just reach into your account and take the money, even though you've already paid the money. So then they might take the money off you and then you can't pay for other things. That might mean that you can't pay for rent or your mortgage or food even, all sorts of other things, because they just take the money off you. This is very likely how these mistakes will happen. And as a lawyer, I can tell you that we get involved when things go wrong. It's not always things that are a result of a disagreement with somebody and a conflict of ideas. It is very often things where it's just gone wrong. It's not been registered properly. We've had, I kid you not, we've had situations where a solicitor has not registered the property in our client's name. And they've gone back nearly 20 years and no one had noticed. They only noticed when the person whose name it was in went bankrupt and then realized that the property had been tied up in the bankruptcy proceedings because it wasn't in our client's name. These things do happen. And so this is not going to prevent that. This is, if anything, is going to make this worse because there's going to be so many different ways that this can go wrong. They're going to have this control and oversight like you never would expect. And then we see all of the examples and the ideas of the fairly far-fetched ones to say, you know, if you're traveling too much, they might curtail your traveling. These are a little bit far-fetched, but it wouldn't surprise me because not a lot surprises me these days. Or you're spending too much money. They're already talking about caps on how much money they can withdraw. And if you go to a bank, they already ask you, what is it for? Their excuse is money laundering. They say they have to do checks on withdrawal of cash to make sure it's not used for money laundering or illegal purposes. And so they insist on knowing why you're buying it. Let's say the video example I saw was someone buying I think it was a bike. They were buying a motorbike. The bank insisted on knowing how much it was, where it was from, and all this sort of stuff. And he said, oh, I don't know. I just want to take the money out because I'm going to go and buy a bike. I don't know what I'm buying or where from yet. And they said, well, when you know, you can come back and get the money. But it's his money. And these are real stories. If they're going to cap what you can withdraw, they're going to cap what you can do. Imagine how they can cap it with a digital ID. They can switch you off. My wife goes mad about the lighting in one of our rooms here because it's controlled by a device whose name begins with A that I won't say because it will drive yours bananas. But it's controlled by that. And she hates it because if the internet goes down, we can't even turn off the lights. But believe me, if there's a digital ID and you're plugged into the government database, they can switch you off. And that is what I think we should all be scared about. So let me know what your thoughts and comments are in the box below. But I think this response from government is absolutely ridiculous. This email response opens with, we will introduce it, even though 2.7 million people said, don't do it. Let me know your thoughts and thanks for watching.